The day the sky split. The people of Valus 9 had seen war before, but never like this. The sky was burning and the horizon was crawling with ships that moved like hungry insects. The raiders had come again to take what little the frontier colony had left. Children hid under tables and miners sealed doors that would not hold long. The defense towers were silent. No council fleet answered the distress call, and fear spread like smoke through the narrow streets. Lyra stood on the ridge above, the old ore foundry. Her small ship grounded by lack of fuel, she was a courier once proud to carry messages between stations, now only watching death approach. She clutched her wrist beacon, hoping for a signal. Any signal, but there was only static. She thought of her mother's old stories about soldiers from Earth who once stood for worlds like theirs, and she wished for them, even if they were only myths. The first strike hit the city's edge. Flames swallowed the loading yards, and the air filled with the sound of collapsing steel. The raiders moved fast, armored skimmers sweeping through the dust, demanding surrender over open channels. No one spoke. The people of Valus 9 had learned that surrender only delayed pain. Lyra ran down the slope to the foundry, hoping to help the wounded, but the air shimmered and the ground trembled. A new sound rolled over the clouds, deep and steady like thunder that did not end from the upper atmosphere. Streaks of fire descended, but not missiles. They were ships, dark and shaped like blades slicing through the sky. They fell so fast that even the raiders paused to stare. One of them tore through the storm cloud above the foundry, trailing heat and light, and then slowed with impossible grace. It landed hard, kicking up a wave of dust, and out of its belly fell figures in black armor, glowing faintly blue under the smoke. They hit the ground, running. Human soldiers, the word rose in Lyra's mind, as if she had always known it. They moved in, squads covering each other, each step timed with precision. No shouts, no panic, just motion. One knelt, scanning the area. Another raised a shield that unfolded from a wrist plate. They looked like the old depictions from forgotten archives. Human troops. Descending from orbit without hesitation, their leader raised a hand and his voice broke through every comm channel on the moon. Civilians moved to cover. We will hold this ground. Lyra felt a rush of something she had not felt in years. Hope. She ran toward the foundry, where they formed a perimeter using broken loader mechs as barricades. One soldier saw her and guided her behind a wall. His armor scratched his visor. Dark. He spoke through a filtered voice. Stay low. You can help guide people. Inside, she nodded, unable to find words, as shells began to fall again, and the humans returned fire with clean bursts of energy that cut through the raider lines. The battle raged for hours. The raiders outnumbered them 20-1. But the humans never broke formation. Every move was a rhythm, like a single living machine. Their medic treated wounded locals with calm hands. Their engineer rerouted power from the foundry to power a makeshift shield line, and their leader moved from point to point, checking every man and woman by name. Lyra saw him once, helmet off under the broken skylight, his eyes tired but steady. He looked up at the smoke-filled heavens and whispered something she could not hear. When night fell, the raiders pulled back, leaving Rex in silence behind. Lyra walked among the tired soldiers, helping carry stretchers and spare ammo. The human commander approached her, asking how many civilians were left. She told him barely 200, maybe less. He nodded without emotion and simply said, "We do not break." She realized it was more than a phrase. It was what they were, their oath, their identity. Later, she climbed back to the ridge, watching their dropships vanish into the dark clouds above. The storm still glowed, red on the horizon. But she felt the world had changed forever. They had braced for death, and instead the sky had delivered warriors from the forgotten cradle of mankind. And in that moment, she understood that legends could fall from the heavens and still bleed for strangers. First shield. First losses. The dawn on Valus 9 came slow and gray through the drifting smoke. The air smelled of metal and burned soil. The people hiding in the tunnels began to crawl out, blinking at the light and staring in disbelief at the armored figures who stood among the ruins. Human soldiers, real breathing men and women from the lost cradle of Earth. They moved with quiet purpose, repairing their weapons and scanning the horizon. Their commander, Captain Arden, stood beside a shattered turret, watching the radar pulse faint. Green circles over the valley. Lyra carried water to the soldiers, her hands shaking from exhaustion. One of them, a medic with pale eyes, smiled and thanked her before returning To patch a miner's broken leg, they worked without pause, their discipline frightening and comforting. At the same time, the miners whispered among themselves, wondering where these warriors had come from, how they had crossed half the galaxy without a fleet signal or council approval, but none dared ask. The soldiers seemed carved from the will to fight. They spoke little, only to call out bearings or status reports, their tone calm, even when artillery thundered in the distance. When the first counterattack came, it was sudden and brutal. The raiders regrouped during the night, bringing tanks and drones. The humans held their line in the open yard of the ore foundry, using walls of scrap metal as cover. Lyra watched from a half-collapsed catwalk as Captain Arden shouted short orders that carried over the firestorm. Each command clear and steady. The soldiers responded instantly, their rifles humming with white light, each burst precise. No wasted motion, no wild panic. The raiders advanced, in waves, but every time they met the human formation, they broke apart like dust and wind. Still, the price was heavy. Lyra saw a young trooper fall, struck by a plasma round. He hit the ground without a sound. Another dragged him back under cover blood. Smoking through the cracks of the armor, the medic worked in silence. The commander knelt beside them for a heartbeat, then rose and signaled a flanking maneuver. The humans did not mourn. They acted grief buried beneath duty. Their shields formed, again glowing faint blue against the rising sun. Lyra wanted to run, help, scream anything, but her legs froze. She had seen soldiers before, but never like this. They were not fighting to win glory. They were fighting so that strangers might live. A miner beside her whispered that no one had ever come for them before, not the council, not the mercenaries, only these humans who fell from the sky with nothing but courage and a promise. The words hit her like a prayer. We will hold. The battle stretched. Into the afternoon, the heat unbearable, the humans began to run low on ammunition, so they scavenged from the raider dead, adapting alien weapons with quick rewiring. They fought smarter every minute, turning enemy fire against them. Lyra saw one squad lure a tank into a trap, blowing it apart with its own shells. Captain Arden climbed a tower under direct fire to relay coordinates to an unseen ally in orbit, his voice never shaking, even as a shell exploded close enough to throw him off his feet. He rose limping and kept giving orders. By sunset, the raiders withdrew again, leaving smoldering wrecks behind. The foundry yard looked like a graveyard of machines' bodies buried under twisted metal. The humans gathered their fallen in a line. No ceremony, no speeches, just silent respect. Lyra helped cover them with the colony flag torn and stained. She asked the medic how they could keep fighting when death walked beside them. He looked at her and said, "Because if we stop fighting, someone else dies, and that someone might be you." That night, the people of Valus 9 brought what little food they had and shared it with the soldiers around small fires. The humans listened, but said little. One of them showed the children how to patch broken drones. Another repaired a water pump in silence. The commander studied a holographic map alone, his armor off, showing scars like old stories carved into flesh. Lyra approached and asked him if Earth truly still existed. He looked up at the stars and said, "It does, and it remembers those who called for help too late." A wind swept through the valley, carrying the scent of rain. The fires flickered. The humans slept in shifts, rifles resting beside them. The miners whispered about rebuilding the grid. The farmers spoke of planting again. Lyra sat on the ridge where she first saw the dropships, thinking how the sky could bring both death and salvation. The humans had turned hopeless ground into a fortress by will alone, but even she could see their strength was thinning. She wondered what would happen when the raiders came back with more ships, when there was nothing left to give. She did not know that by dawn, the next signal would change everything again, and the truth about the council would begin to unravel forever. Signal: the council ignored morning, rose cold and heavy over Valus 9. The smoke from the wreckage mixed with mist that rolled down from the northern cliffs. The miners began to clear the ruins under the watch of the human soldiers who moved among them, repairing what could still be saved. Captain Arden stood beside a cracked comm tower, his armor streaked with ash, his eyes fixed on a single blinking red light. The transmitter was barely holding together, but it was sending something far beyond the moon. Lyra watched him work, wondering who would ever answer the signal when the council had already turned their back on every frontier. Whirled inside the foundry control room the humans had set up, Their command post screens flickered, showing orbit paths, supply estimates wounded, counts in a single repeating message in the old Terran language. Lyra could not read it, but she could feel the weight in Arden's voice when he said, "The Council ignored our last 6 relays. They left your world to burn because someone paid them." To do so, his tone was calm, not angry, just tired, like a man who had seen the same betrayal too many times before. The other soldiers did not look surprised. They were used to silence from those who claimed to rule the stars. Lyra tried to understand what kind of people they were. No crest, no insignia, no banners, only the same patch on every shoulder, a star split by a rising sun, and under it the words, "Humanity endures." They said they came from the edge of Sol space, a sector the maps marked dead after the collapse, but they spoke of new cities rebuilt under the old flag of Earth, of fleets hidden in deep orbit, waiting for the call of worlds that still remembered the promise that no one would stand alone. She wanted to believe it, yet part of her feared that even legends could lie. As the day grew long, she helped a mechanic named Darius repair power conduits. He told her quietly that the Terran command had been tracking the warlord Karvek for months, and that Valus 9 was not the first world to fall under his raids. Every system that resisted had been abandoned by the Council. After trade bribes flowed into their accounts, the humans had been gathering proof, sending transmissions to the central worlds, but all were intercepted or deleted before reaching the public. Lyra realized the Council did not ignore the frontier out of neglect but out of profit. Her anger burned cold inside. That evening, a tremor shook the ground, and the radar spiked new contacts approaching from orbit, smaller than warships, maybe dropships, but their signatures were scrambled. The humans formed up instantly, moving civilians into underground shelters. Arden ordered all weapons manned. No panic, just methodical efficiency. Lyra stayed near the comm tower, helping Darius hold a loose wire in place as static filled the air. The signal cleared and a voice spoke, not a raider voice, but a smooth, precise tone belonging to someone high in Council command. "This is Administrator Valen of the Rim. Authority. You are ordered to stand down and surrender. Any Terran personnel for interrogation failure to comply will be considered treason." The word struck like a blow. The miners looked at each other, terrified. They knew the Council would rather erase a colony than admit corruption. Arden listened in silence, then calmly replied, "Valus 9 is under Terran protection. We have your orders logged and your bribe trails recorded. Advise withdrawal before we publish." He cut the line and turned to his troops, ready defensive grid 2. The soldiers moved without question. Lyra felt her heart race, realizing that for the first time someone had spoken back to the powerful and dared them to answer. Night fell fast. Wind howled through the ruins, and flashes lit the sky as drones descended. Firing warning shots, the humans countered with precision bursts, knocking each one out of the air before it touched the ground. Arden stood on the foundry roof, watching them fall, his face unreadable. Lyra climbed up beside him. She asked if he thought the Council would really attack their own colony. He said they already have, through neglect, through silence, through greed. She said, "Then what will you do?" He answered the same thing we always do. We hold until the truth reaches those who still care. Later, she found an old archive terminal buried under debris. She powered it up and saw fragments of old Starborn logs, records of ships that once served under Terran captains centuries ago. Names erased from history, yet still written in hidden files. She read them until dawn, realizing that the bond between the Starborn and humanity was not broken, just forgotten, and now it was returning through fire and loss. As morning light touched the valley, new signals appeared on the horizon. Not enemy, but unknown and vast. The humans stopped to look up as streaks crossed the upper sky, silent like silver shadows entering atmosphere. Their sensors could not identify them yet. Lyra felt something deep in her chest shift. She did not know if it was hope or fear, but she knew the war had only just begun, and the galaxy was about to remember what it meant when humanity answered a call. Break the blade. The fourth dawn on Valus 9 began with thunder that did not come from the clouds but from the ground itself. The raiders had returned stronger than before, guided by the warlord Karvek himself. His fleet blackened the horizon while his ground cannons began to dig fire into the soil. The air shimmered with heat. The refugees huddled inside the tunnels and the humans prepared for what they called a blade storm, a full-scale siege meant to erase every trace of life. The foundry that had become their fortress now stood as the last barrier between survival and extinction. Captain Arden moved through his lines, speaking to every soldier, checking weapons, adjusting power cells, and steadying the frightened miners who volunteered to carry ammo. There was no fear in his steps, only the still calm of a man who had already accepted the weight of command. Lyra watched him climb onto the ridge and open a small device that projected a map of the valley. Red dots filled the field marking enemy positions. She had never seen so many. Karvek had brought everything he owned, every tank drone and crawler, to crush the Terrans and make an example of Valis 9. As the bombardment began, the ground shook, dust fell from the foundry ceiling, and metal screamed under the strain the humans held. Formation shields overlapping, forming a glowing wall that shimmered like a living flame every time the shells hit their defense lines, lit up with sparks. Lyra ran from post to post, carrying orders and helping the wounded. She saw Darius soldering, wires under fire, shouting for power to reroute through the secondary conduit. The noise was deafening, the sky filled with smoke and static. The sun itself disappeared behind the haze. In the middle of chaos, Arden saw what others could not. He noticed the rhythm of the bombardment, the pattern of the shots. He realized that the enemy was not trying to breach the front wall, but to draw the humans into open ground where the siege cannon waited hidden behind the southern ridge. He turned to his second-in-command and ordered a diversion. "We will bleed him from within the tunnels while they chase ghosts." Lyra overheard and volunteered to help pilot the decoy skimmer, her hands trembling but her voice steady. Arden looked at her and said, "You owe me no risk," she answered. "This is my home. I am already at risk." The plan began at dusk. Lyra flew the battered skimmer across the open valley, broadcasting false distress signals. The raider drones followed her trail, lighting up the sky with red. Tracers behind her. The humans slipped through storm drains and hidden shafts beneath the foundry, carrying explosives and silent rifles. The raiders focused on her skimmer, believing the humans were retreating as she pulled high over the ridge. She saw it, the siege cannon, massive and coiled with energy, its barrel glowing blue, ready to fire. She dove lower, daring it to track her. The cannon turned slowly, targeting her small craft, and in that moment its cooling vents glowed exposed below the ridge. The Terrans struck with perfect timing. Small charges detonated along the coolant lines and the cannon shuddered. Melting from the inside, the explosion lit the night in white light visible for miles. The shockwave threw Lyra's skimmer spinning. Out of control, she hit the ground hard, scraping across the dirt. But she crawled up alive, ears ringing. She looked toward the horizon and saw the cannon split in half like a broken sword. The humans emerged from the tunnels, firing into the confusion, their rifles cutting through the raiders with swift precision. Karvek roared across the open channel, accusing his troops of cowardice and ordering a purge of all civilians. The humans heard his voice echo over every comm and realized the time for restraint was gone. They advanced in formation, pushing the raiders back step by step, their movements like waves, relentless but never wild. Lyra picked up a fallen rifle and joined a group of miners covering their flank. She was terrified, yet a strange peace filled her, because for the first time she was fighting beside legends. By midnight, the valley burned red and gold. The humans had destroyed the cannon and captured supply caches, but the cost was heavy. Several of their own had fallen, including Darius, who died sealing a breach to protect the civilians. Arden stood over his body silently before ordering his troops to rest in shifts. He knew Karvek would not stop. He would return with orbital support and more lies for the Council. The battle was only a delay, not a victory, yet it had bought them time. And time was the weapon humanity had always used best. When dawn came again, the raiders were gone, retreating into the desert, leaving behind wrecks and silence. The people emerged, blinking at the light, unable to believe they were still alive. Lyra stood beside Arden on the ridge where the cannon once stood, now a smoking crater. He said softly, "You broke the blade." She shook her head and said, "No, Captain, we all did." He looked at her for a long moment, then smiled faintly and said, "Then we will have to break the hand that forged it next." The wind carried the smell of ash and hope, and for the first time in years, Valis 9 saw a sunrise that did not belong to its enemies. The price of mercy. The ruins of Valis 9 steamed under a red sun. The air was thick with the smell of scorched metal and smoke. Yet among the ashes, life began to move again. The miners came out of hiding. The wounded called for water, and the human soldiers, though battered, still stood watch, their armor dull with soot. Captain Arden walked through the rubble with Lyra beside him, surveying what they had saved and what they had lost. The foundry still stood, though scarred. The shield emitters flickered weakly, and half the power grid was gone. But the people were alive. The humans had turned the foundry into a command hub. Now its walls carried maps of the outer systems with red lines, showing Karvek's routes. Arden and his officers discussed what would come next. They knew the warlord would not retreat forever, would regroup and strike again with heavier fire, and the council would do nothing to stop him. Perhaps even help him erase the evidence of their betrayal. Lyra listened in silence as they spoke of logistics and code relays she could not understand, but she saw in their faces the quiet fatigue of those who fought too long without rest. When night fell, the soldiers built a small memorial for their dead. No words, no flags, just names scratched into metal plates placed on the ridge. The colonists stood beside them, sharing food and stories. Even in grief, there was a strange warmth that filled the air. Lyra looked at the sky where the stars shimmered behind drifting clouds. She wondered how many of those stars had once seen human boots touch their soil and how many had been left behind to die forgotten. She thought about the council who ruled from polished towers and counted the cost of mercy in coins. The next morning, a faint transmission came through the repaired comm line. It was a council broadcast, but not a rescue. It was propaganda footage of an official named Valen declaring that Terran insurgents had invaded Valus 9 and that loyal forces were en route to restore order. The miners watched in disbelief. The humans watched in silence. Arden clenched his jaw but said nothing. Then the feed changed, hijacked by another signal. Lyra saw a static flicker, and then an image of Karvek himself appeared on every screen. He laughed cruelly, saying, "Earth is dust. And these soldiers fight for ghosts. Surrender them and live. Defy me, and I will burn your sky." Arden stepped forward into the camera's view and replied with calm steel, his voice echoing across every speaker. "Karvek, you speak of ghosts, yet you fear them. Earth lives and remembers every world that called for help." He offered terms of surrender to the warlord, promising fair trial and mercy. If he laid down his weapons, Karvek only snarled and struck down one of his own officers for daring to speak. Of peace, Lyra saw it all and knew that if no one showed the truth, the galaxy would believe the lies. She ran to the archive room and with the help of a few miners began recording everything the humans had done, the rescues, the defense, the council. Threats and the warlord's cruelty together. They transmitted it across every open channel, to trading hubs, pirate relays, and backworld networks within hours. Half the Rim was watching the footage. The truth could not be buried anymore. But truth always had a price. By evening, a new wave of ships appeared in orbit. Their insignia was not Karvek's, but the Council's enforcement fleet. They claimed to come for peacekeeping. But their weapons were hot. The humans prepared again for battle. Arden refused to fire first. Instead, he sent another message to the Council ships urging them to verify the broadcast data and see the truth for themselves. The commanders hesitated long enough for the Terrans to shield the civilians. Karvek, furious that his control was slipping, launched a reckless strike from orbit targeting both sides. His ships fired without aim, hitting his own allies as well as the colony. The humans countered with precision strikes, neutralizing the bombardment before it could wipe out the valley. The sky burned gold and crimson with falling wreckage, and Lyra stood among the trembling colonists, watching the humans hold their formation, even as debris rained around them. When the firing stopped, the Council fleet withdrew, unable to explain their actions. Karvek's flagship retreated behind the moons, leaving silence. Arden ordered all guns lowered. His men, exhausted, barely standing, he turned to Lyra and said, "You cannot win a war with rage, only with proof. Now the galaxy will see what truth costs." That night, the people lit torches across the valley, honoring the fallen. The humans sat quietly among them. No pride, no celebration, just reflection. Lyra realized they were not saviors. They were reminders of what courage looked like when the world forgot. And as the wind carried the faint hum of distant engines, she knew this was not the end. The warlord still lived, and the reckoning for the Council had only begun. When the fleet showed its face, the Days after the last battle passed like a strange calm before another storm. The air of Valus 9 was filled with the whine of repair drones and the clang of human engineers fixing what could be saved. The colony breathed again, but fear never left its walls. Karvik had disappeared, yet everyone knew he would return stronger and angrier than before. Captain Arden stood on the ridge watching the far horizon through the ash-tinted light. Lyra joined him, her face marked with exhaustion. He said softly, "They are regrouping out there somewhere." She asked how he knew. He smiled faintly and said, "Because that is what I would do." The council remained silent. No aid, no explanation. The only signals were empty political broadcasts repeating the same lie that the Terrans had violated neutral territory. But across the rim, the truth spread faster than their censorship. Miners, traders, and frontier worlds replayed the footage Lyra had sent showing how the humans fought to protect, rather than conquer. The name Terran became a whisper of hope in taverns and docking bays, even among worlds that once called humanity extinct. The legend was returning, wrapped in smoke and sacrifice. 3 days later, the scanners caught movement in high orbit. Small ships approaching fast. Lyra ran to the control room where Arden was already issuing orders. "Shields up, stand by, but do not fire." The colony watched the sky as streaks of silver light tore through the clouds. The first ship appeared enormous and silent, its hull marked with the same rising sun symbol the soldiers wore. It was followed by dozens more sleek frigates and support carriers emerging from slipspace like spirits returning home. A voice broke through the comms, clear and strong. "This is the Terran Relief Command responding to distress beacon authorization. Sol Protocol 7. The valley erupted in disbelief. The humans on the ground saluted. The civilians stared at the sky in awe. For the first time since the raids began, they saw real fleet ships moving in perfect formation, their engines glowing white against the night. The flagship descended slowly through the haze, and a single phrase scrolled across its hull: "Humanity endures." Arden met the arriving commander on the landing field, an older woman with steel-gray hair, and the same calm authority. She listened as Arden explained the situation. The raids, the council corruption, and the cost of holding Valus 9. She nodded once and said, "The Rim will not stand alone. Again, we came for the truth, not for conquest." Then she turned to the crowd and told them every transmission had been received, every lie had been uncovered, and the council would answer before the galaxy for its crimes. As relief ships descended, bringing medics and supplies, the sky suddenly flared red. Karvik's remaining forces had launched a desperate attack from behind the moons. His fleet, larger than anyone expected, poured out of hiding. Firing indiscriminately, the ground shook. The Terran ships responded with surgical precision, cutting power to the raiders' engines and slicing through their formations without destroying them. The strikes were fast, clean, disabling, but not annihilating. Arden ordered all ground troops to protect civilians only, no retaliation beyond defense. Lyra watched the discipline and realized this was what true power looked like. Not domination, but control. The council ships that had fled earlier now returned, broadcasting pleas for ceasefire. They wanted to claim the victory as their own. But the Terran admiral ignored them instead. She transmitted live evidence of their corruption to every channel across the sector. The names, the accounts, the supply records, everything the galaxy saw. What had been hidden for years, the council could not deny it anymore. Riots broke out in their core worlds before the battle even ended, on Valus 9. The fighting slowed as Karvik's lieutenants surrendered one by one, realizing their leader had vanished, abandoning them. Arden's soldiers moved among them, collecting weapons and giving water to prisoners. Lyra helped distribute food to the children huddled under broken shelters. She felt tears sting her eyes. Not from grief, but from the sheer weight of relief. The nightmare was ending, not with fire, but with justice. When night fell, the Terran fleet remained in silent orbit, lights glittering like constellations new and familiar. At the same time, the valley glowed faintly. Under their shadow, Lyra stood beside Arden, watching the stars. She asked what would happen now. He said quietly, "The council will rebuild or fall, but the Rim will remember who stood for them, and you will help them remember." She said, "Me." He nodded. "You showed them the truth, and truth is the only weapon they fear." In that quiet moment, the wind carried the faint hum of the orbiting ships like a heartbeat over the world. Humanity had returned, not as conquerors, but as witnesses and guardians, and For the first time, the people of Valus 9 looked to the sky without fear, knowing that someone out there finally kept their promise. The oath and the aftermath. The warlord Karvik did not vanish forever. He reappeared at the edge of the system, his flagship scarred from battle, his pride wounded deeper than any weapon could reach. He gathered what remained of his fleet and declared vengeance on both the Council and the Terrans. His voice echoed across open channels, promising to burn Valus 9 until not even ash remained. The people of the colony trembled once more as sirens wailed through the night. But this time, they did not hide. This time they trusted the soldiers who had fallen from the Sky Captain. Arden stood before his troops. On the ridge overlooking the valley, his armor repaired, his voice steady. He told them this was the last stand, not for conquest, not for pride, but for peace. They would not strike first. They would hold until Karvik's fury broke against them. The Terran fleet formed a wide perimeter above the planet, their ships glowing like a second sunrise, ready but restrained. Lyra stood among the civilians, helping the medics organize shelters, her heart heavy, yet calm. She had seen what these humans could do and what they chose not to do. That was their power. At dawn, the horizon split open with fire. The raiders came in waves, thousands of drones and armored skimmers screaming through the clouds. Karvik's voice roared over the comms, demanding surrender. The Terran admiral answered with silence, then ordered precision strike patterns. No civilian zones, no fire beyond limits. The humans fought like living machines, moving with patience and grace, their formation unbroken even as explosions painted the sky golden red. The Council's last remaining fleet hovered at a distance, too afraid to join, too proud to admit shame. Lyra stood on the command deck of the Foundry, watching the battle unfold on the main screen. She saw Karvik's flagship push through the burning wreckage straight toward the Terran line, its cannons glowing bright enough to blind a man. Captain Arden's ship moved forward alone, meeting it head-on. He opened a direct channel, his calm voice carrying across every signal. Karvik, this ends now. No more slaves, no more lies. Surrender and face justice. Karvik laughed, a sound like a dying beast, and said, "Humans still believe in justice." How quaint, then. He fired. The two ships collided in a blaze of light. The shockwave rolled across the upper atmosphere, visible even from the surface. The people of Valus 9 fell to the ground as dust rained from the sky. Lyra gripped the console, her heart pounding, thinking Arden was gone forever. But as the light faded, one ship still moved, the Terran flagship, its armor scorched but intact. The warlord's vessel drifted powerless, its engines dead, its weapons silenced. The Terrans had targeted his core systems, disabling, rather than destroying. They had beaten him without revenge. Karvik's surrender was broadcast live across the sector. He was taken alive, bound by his own officers, who no longer believed in his cause. The Terran fleet escorted him to orbit, where a tribunal of frontier leaders waited to pass judgment. The Council tried to interfere, but their authority had collapsed. Their worlds were rioting. Their lies exposed one by one, their members fled into exile. The old order of the galaxy had ended, not with rebellion but with truth. When the dust finally settled, the valley of Valus 9 was silent once more. Except for the wind moving through the broken metal, the people began rebuilding their homes, their farms, and their lives. The Terrans stayed for months, helping restore power, teaching medicine, and leaving supplies before their next journey. One evening, Captain Arden met Lyra beside the new memorial built where the Foundry once stood. It carried no statues, only names, human and Starborn side by side. He told her the fleet would move on to another world that had called for help. She asked who would protect them when the Terrans left. He smiled softly and said, "You will." The following morning, the entire colony gathered under the clear blue sky for a ceremony unlike any they had ever seen. Lyra stood before the crowd wearing a new uniform with the emblem of a star rising from the horizon. She raised her hand and repeated the words she had once heard from a dying soldier. "We do not break." It was the Starborn oath now shared between human and alien, a promise that no world would be abandoned again. The people repeated it after her, their voices rising like thunder across the hills. Humanity had given them more than survival. It had given them a reason to stand. As the Terran fleet ascended through the clouds, their engines left trails of light that lingered in the sky long after they were gone. The children of Valus 9 watched until the last glow faded, and Lyra whispered softly, "They came, when no one else would. The stars above seemed to flicker in answer, as if remembering the promise of a people who refused to let others face the dark alone. Years later, songs would be written about that day. Some said the sky itself wept when the humans departed. Others claimed their ships still passed by in secret, watching from orbit. Whatever the truth, one thing never changed. When storms rolled across the valley, the people would look up and say the same words passed down from those who saw them first. "We will hold the stars." Remember, Vilas 9 was quiet at last. The smoke of war had cleared, leaving a land that was scarred yet alive. The valley shimmered under twin suns as the survivors worked together, humans and Starborn side by side, rebuilding what had been broken. Lyra stood on the ridge where she had first seen the Terran dropships descend. Her eyes tracing the horizon where the sky met the distant mountains, she felt the weight of all that had happened, the fear, the loss, the courage, and the promises that had been kept. Captain Arden approached her silently, his armor still bearing the marks of battle, but his stance calm and steady. He looked out over the valley and said softly, "The galaxy will remember what was done here." She nodded, understanding that they had not just survived, they had changed everything. One day the Council would have to answer for its corruption. Karvek would no longer terrorize the Rim, and the Starborn would carry the oath forward to every world that needed hope. The Terran fleet had departed, leaving behind supplies, medics, and engineers, but more importantly, they had left a legacy. Their methods precise, their mercy deliberate, their presence a lesson that strength was not measured by conquest but by protection and restraint. Lyra thought of the fallen soldiers, their names etched in the memorial below the ridge. She traced her fingers over each name, promising to never forget. She had learned from them the true meaning of courage and the cost of keeping a vow word. Of Valis 9's defense spread across nearby systems, whispers turned into stories. Stories turned into legend. Humans who fell from the sky to protect the weak became a symbol of what was possible when the strong chose to shield the powerless. Lyra traveled between settlements, teaching what she had learned, sharing the Starborn oath with those willing to listen, and promising that no world would face annihilation alone, ever again. Years passed, yet the memory of that day remained vivid. In the minds of those who lived it, the valley bloomed again. Crops grew among repaired buildings. Children played where battle had raged, laughter replacing screams. The sky no longer carried fear but light and hope. Every evening Lyra would climb the ridge, looking up at the stars, remembering the soldiers who fell and the humans who came, when no one else would. She whispered the oath softly to herself. "We do not break," and she knew that somewhere in the galaxy, the Terran fleet remembered, too. The stars above seemed to shine brighter, as if acknowledging the promise. Kept the winds carried faint echoes of distant engines and quiet laughter. The valley hummed with life and resilience. Lyra finally understood that survival was only the first step. Justice, mercy, and courage were what made it worth fighting for. She felt at peace knowing that the bond between humanity and the Starborn had been forged forever in fire and sacrifice, and that the galaxy would never forget who kept their word. The end.